Who's to blame for what happened?
Well, obviously, it was a great shame that we weren't able to reach agreement with Greater Manchester. We tried extremely hard. I had conversations, as did the Prime Minister's advisor, Sir Ed Lister, and the Prime Minister himself spoke to the Mayor, Andy Burnham, yesterday. But the public health situation in Greater Manchester was deteriorating. The evidence that we were receiving about the capacity of some of the hospitals in Greater Manchester, the number of cases, the fact it was rising up the age brackets to those people who were in greater danger of ill health.
The rate's gone down.
No, well, the number of cases rising in some parts of Greater Manchester. It seems there's some evidence of it plateauing in the centre of Manchester, perhaps linked to universities. But the very clear the very clear public health advice.
Is it not?
Can I just finish answering the question?
No, but you're saying it's going up, and I'm saying blatantly it isn't, because
I'm not sure what statistics you're actually looking at there, because the very clear public health advice that I received from the NHS, from NHS England and the Chief Medical Officer, was that this was a serious and deteriorating situation in Greater Manchester, and that we needed to act. That actually we probably, in honesty, should have acted a few days ago, but we hadn't been able to reach an agreement with the Mayor of Greater Manchester. We wanted to do that. You've seen that we've been able to do that, I think, very successfully with other mayors and local leaders in the North West, like in Liverpool City region.
That's not what they said. They said that they were forced into it.
No,
the Mayor of Liverpool said that you were forced into it. We'll have to respectfully
disagree, because that's not the case. We had very productive conversations there. We've just been having... Yesterday, we've just had very productive conversations with Dan Jarvis, the Mayor of Sheffield and South Yorkshire, and those discussions are coming to a conclusion this morning, I hope. But we had to take action. Unfortunately, we weren't able to reach an agreement with the local leaders. But the important message to people in Greater Manchester is that, regardless of that, we're obviously going to do everything we can to support people and businesses in Greater Manchester. We've put in place a very extensive package of support, and that is there to help them through a challenging period.
OK. As I said, the figures for Manchester, the City of Manchester, have gone down, and that, according to Public Health England,
I think it's important to clarify, because this is a serious situation.
Yes, it is.
And I know that there are some who are downplaying what's happening in Greater Manchester. I think that's ill-advised.
Who's downplaying?
Well, some of the local leaders in Greater Manchester put out a statement over the weekend saying that they didn't think the situation was quite as serious as the public health professionals in the government were saying. There are more COVID patients in hospitals in Greater Manchester at the moment than there are in the whole of the southeast and southwest of England combined. So this is a serious situation. We do need to take action. We had spent 10 or 11 days discussing it, so it was right that we moved forward, put in place those measures. I appreciate how difficult they are for people in Greater Manchester, and importantly, that we put in place the financial and other support that's needed.
So if it was so important, why were you squabbling over £5 million?
It wasn't just about £5 million. We had dozens of conversations. I'm afraid I'm not going to get into a point-scoring argument, but we simply were not able to reach agreement. The Mayor and local leaders were not willing to agree to the package of support that we wanted to put in place. And I completely understand that as a leader of a city, you want the absolute best for your local residents. I do as a constituency MP for my own constituency. But as a government, we have to act with fairness and be proportionate to what we're doing elsewhere in the country. And we had offered, and had been accepted, a package of support for other places, the neighbours of Greater Manchester in the North West, the Liverpool City region and Lancashire. I hope we're on the cusp of an agreement with South Yorkshire. And Andy Burnham was adamant that he had to have a better deal than his neighbours. I understand where he's coming from, as I say, but that's not the way the government can act. We have to act in a fair way, which provides a broadly similar package of support to all parts of the country.
How fair was it that he found out live on the telly?
He didn't.
They were holding a phone up, and he
didn't.
So when did he find out?
I phoned him and told him.
Did you when?
Well, we had several conversations over the course of the morning, including with the Prime Minister, and I told him the final news at 2 o'clock.
So he was showboating?
Well, I'm not in the slightest bit interested in point scoring. This isn't about personalities or press conferences on the steps of town halls. In the end, it's about an important public health situation, and it's about ensuring that the people of Greater Manchester now get the support that they deserve.
OK, I just want to ask you about what's going on with South Yorkshire and then Sheffield, and we'll come back to Manchester. So from what you're saying about Dan Jarvis and also South Yorkshire, it looks as though they're going into Tier 3.
Well, it's not right for me to preempt a full statement that the Prime Minister and Dan Jarvis will make later today, but we have had very successful conversations with him and with the leaders of South Yorkshire. Again, there's a serious situation there, and rightly they wanted to take action. We've discussed that over the course of yesterday and early this morning, and an announcement we made shortly.
And those conversations more productive than they have been with Greater Manchester?
Well, we've actually had very productive conversations with local leaders in all the parts of the country that we've worked with so far. Greater Manchester is the only one where we were not able, in the end, to secure an agreement. But I don't want to overstate that, because actually some of the local leaders there, like Sir Richard Lees, the long-standing leader of Manchester City Council, David Greenhouse of Bolton Council, were extremely helpful and constructive. They fought for their city and their residents, understandably, but they saw the need for us to come together and have as united a public health message as possible. My door is always open to them, and indeed to Andy Burnham, to discuss how we move forwards, and that the extensive package of support which is there can now be put at the service of the people of Greater Manchester.
So the £60 million is still on the table?
Well, it's more than just on the table. It's there, it has Manchester's name on it, and I want to ensure that it gets into the hands of local business people, particularly the small businesses of Greater Manchester, some of which are now going to have to close, hopefully, only for a short period of time, for 28 days, in order to bear down on the virus.
How long is that £60 million supposed to last for? In other words, how long is the Tier 3 lockdown in Manchester?
It's 28 days, the lockdown, at which point there'll be a review on both sides, obviously informed by Public Health England and the Joint Biosecurity Centre. Let's hope that we won't need to extend it thereafter, but we've tried to put in place a very broad package of support. Remember, I know there's a debate about the £60 million, but actually that's only one part, a relatively small element of a much broader package of support. You have the job support scheme that will offer people who are not able to work 2/3 of their unearned wages. Yeah, we've got business grants, we've got the cut in VAT, the cut in business rates. So there's a broad package of support. And for Greater Manchester, there's not only the 60 million, there's the 22 million for extra support for contact tracing, so that that system can work at its absolute best. And also we're providing a very significant additional amount of money for local councils. So the total package of additional support for Greater Manchester is likely to be well over £150 million, building on all of the work that we've done together since the start of the pandemic.
Something the Prime Minister didn't mention in his briefing yesterday was about gyms in Greater Manchester. Are they allowed to stay open or not?
I think that gyms are being asked to close, but you'll have to look on gov.uk when, or we can revert to you when the regulations are published. But we've adopted the same model as Lancashire is having as the nearest neighbour of Greater Manchester. OK, interesting that we don't know the answer to that. What is the actual exit strategy for regions that are in Tier 3? Well, as I say, they will be in this position for 28 days only, at which point there will be a review point on both sides. I hope that the good relations that we have with most parts of the country will enable us to do that in a very amicable way, to really address what is the public health situation. Is the area able to move out? We're also working...
Yeah, what's the criteria, though? How do you decide?
Well, there's a range of different factors. It's not purely the rate of incidence of the virus, important though that is. We'll also look at the particular settings, how it's playing in the different age brackets. You know, obviously, those people of a younger age are much less likely to get seriously unwell. Also, I think this is an important point, to look at the state of play in local hospitals. How much capacity is there? How many COVID patients are unfortunately coming into ICU? That was one of the factors that particularly played on our mind with respect to Greater Manchester. In London, the Mayor and the government have worked with Public Health England to devise some trigger points, which are not an exhaustive list, but are a guide to residents and to businesses in London as to the sorts of things we would be looking to if London were able to come out of Tier 2, where it currently is today. And we've made a similar offer to other places like Greater Manchester, that they could work with Public Health England to devise things which would be in the public domain, could give people a really good guide as to what the future holds.
You told me I had to sit outside when I had lunch with my colleagues the other day. I was freezing, I had my coat on, and that's not the case at all. You can have a working lunch inside.
Well, I believe you can, but I think that's a a loophole that's being closed.
Oh, is it? OK. Talk to me about... did I also read that the Mayor of London wanted the 10 p.m. curfew lifted?
Well, I don't know. I think you'd have to ask Sadiq Khan that question. He, as far as I can remember, was the one who proposed the 10 p.m. curfew. I mean, I think, look, we're dealing with a rapidly developing situation here. So I appreciate that people's views will change over time. All of our views, to some extent, have changed over time.
But either way, it's going to stay in place.
But, you know, he, like Keir Starmer, has had a whole series of different policies over time. We will obviously keep having to look at the evidence. The advice that we've received is that the 10 p.m. curfew does help to reduce the amount of interaction between people in social settings and therefore to have an impact on the virus. OK,
let me just put this to you, if I may. Apparently there's an algorithm that has been developed by Oxford University scientists suggesting that if we shield 5% of Brits, we could see a massive reduction in the number of deaths, and it would be much cheaper than all these regional or perhaps a circuit breaker lockdown.
Well, I've seen this argument, and obviously I'm not a scientist, so I'm probably not best placed to give you the best advice, but the advice that I've received is to treat that proposition with a degree of caution, because remember, there are lots of people in this country living in multi-generational families. Those people are more likely to be in deprived households. They're also more likely to be BAME households. And so it's quite difficult to shield the most vulnerable people in society completely because of the nature of some of the households in which people live. Also, the virus has a habit of finding, like water going through cracks, to find its way into settings, even if people go to quite a lot of trouble to shield themselves. And there's no country in the world that's managed to successfully shield, to sequester a group of people for a long enough period to ensure that everybody else can go out and, you know, enjoy their lives to the full. Okay. So I would treat that with a degree of caution. We have, of course, in the past had a shielding policy for the clinically extremely vulnerable. They weren't actually just the elderly. It was a very broad range of people, including 80,000 children. We have prepared further advice there, which can be deployed if necessary. But it will be a different approach to in the past, where we'd say to people that they can go out, they can go to the shops and so on, but they need to exercise a high degree of caution because of the nature of their underlying health issues. Let's
end where we started with Andy Burnham, should we? I mean, it's a win-win for him, really, isn't he? He's come across as a working-class hero, and all of those red wall constituencies that you won over at the last election are going to be looking at the Westminster elite and thinking, maybe we'll vote Labour at the next election.
Well, I'm not interested in showboating or indeed in personalities. I'm interested in public health. We discussed with leaders in Greater Manchester for 10 or 11 days how we could take action against a very serious public health crisis in the city region.
But by saying that, forgive me, Mr. Jenrick, but by saying that, you're suggesting that he is not interested in the health of people in Greater Manchester.
You asked me a question about whether this will lead to how people vote in a future election. As I say, that is not in my thoughts. What I want to do is take decisive action now to keep people safe. I also want to ensure that we protect their livelihoods by putting in place the right financial package. We will do that for Greater Manchester. People at home should know that regardless of personalities, we will provide the support that they deserve. But we have very good relationships with other local leaders in the North West. We've talked about some of them already. And that's right. Central and local government should be working in harmony to try to tackle a national crisis.
Are you suggesting for one moment that that's not what Mr. Burnham wanted?
No, you've asked me that question. I said that what I am doing is trying to work as closely as possible with local leaders to ensure we put in place the right measures for people in a timely fashion. That's exactly what the government has done here. That's what the Prime Minister tried to do yesterday. So we've taken action now. We will be putting in place these further restrictions. Okay. But please be assured that all of the support that Greater Manchester asked for and needs will now be in place from this week onwards.
And a final thought. You said that he was chatting on the phone to the Prime Minister yesterday, still couldn't reach a conclusion. How would you describe that conversation? Was it a bit tetchy?
No, the Prime Minister said that he was very grateful for the hard work that local leaders and other public servants throughout Greater Manchester have done so far. He completely understood the challenge in that city as across the whole of the country. You know, all leaders are grappling with difficult challenges, but the Prime Minister was very clear that we had to act because that was the clear advice that he had received from our medical advisors, and that we now needed to bring these agreements or the discussions to a successful conclusion so that we could put in place the measures and move forwards.
Okay.